All right. Hello, everybody. Here is my presentation on how to find the beauty of life after the trauma of war. So, who am I? Hello, everybody. My name is Quinn Sbrega, and I'm currently a freshman at Miracosta College. And I'm pursuing a bachelor's degree in registered nursing, which deals with behavior of trauma. I'm enrolled as an honor student in my English 100 class, which has given me the opportunity to present this lecture for you guys today. All right, in this presentation, I will be mostly explaining what generational trauma means and how it pertains to the literary fiction novel titled On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous, written by Ocean Vuong. I will first begin by stating a few facts about the Vietnam War and the lifestyles by Vietnamese citizens. And then I will present a brief overview of the definition of generational trauma and what it means to live with it in a foreign country. I will then give a brief overview of the author and poet Ocean Vuong and a summary of his novel. After introducing you guys to the main characters of the novel, I will delve into the actual substance of the point of my presentation, which is how generational trauma is shown through little dog Vaughn and Rose, which are the main characters throughout the novel, and how they learn to discover life's beauty despite said trauma. Okay, so the Vietnam War. Began in the mid-50s and continued on through its slow political battles and guerrilla warfare, severely slowing down the time it took for anything to really be accomplished. Many members of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or South Vietnamese Army, fought alongside the U.S. Army. However, oftentimes they carried a lack of discipline and refused to fight, especially in cases such as the 1968 Tet Offensive, which is mentioned as a deception case of trauma in Lon, the grandmother of the novel. Okay. Some civilians served the U.S. Army as interpreters, contractors, or cleaning workers. Others traded sides from day to day, using the U.S. Army and the Viet Cong based on the meeting of their most basic needs, but all experienced the violent, bloody, and dreadful nature of war. After the fall of Saigon, signaling the end of the war in 1975, nearly 130,000 Vietnamese citizens fled the country. Images of Vietnamese citizens attempting to board U.S. ships and the aircrafts flooded television screens across America, leading to a growth of prejudice against these people. A Gallup poll revealed that only 36% of citizens were in favor of immigration. And as of 2015, 1.3 million Vietnamese immigrants lived in the U.S., with over 95% of them because of the aftermath of the war, and for just an overall better life. Now, on to the main problem that I will be discussing today, which is generational trauma. So, what is generational trauma, and how does it manifest in families and communities? Generational trauma is most basically defined as trauma that isn't just experienced by one person, but extends from one generation to the next, with ever decreasing values. In the field of study known as epigenetics, a study was published defining epigenetics as a set of potentially heritable changes in the genome that can be introduced by environmental events. Symptoms of generational trauma consist of hyperventilation, a sense of shortened future, mistrust, high anxiety, depression, panic attacks, nightmares, insomnia, sporadic fight or flight responses, and issues with self-esteem and confidence. What makes this even better is that there's no direct clinical treatment besides time for this type of disease. In 1966, generational trauma was first recognized by a Canadian psychiatrist by the name of Vivian M. Rokoff, who recorded high rates of psychological distress among children of individuals who survived the Holocaust. A quote from another, more modern psychiatrist by the name of Dr. De Silva states that people in countries that have endured years, even decades of war, also have generational trauma. I wonder what wars went on for decades. Maybe, for example, the Vietnam War. All right. So The main thing that carried back to the US from the war from Vietnamese citizens was not entirely a loss of money or materials, but a loss of wealth and stability to one's mental being after the terrible deeds that war had seared into their minds. In fact, a study on intergenerational stress on refugees found that second generation Vietnamese Americans were extremely sensitive to their parents' trauma and often felt a burden to compensate for their parents' losses. In the case of the Southeast Asian community, refugees who undergo PTSD experience constant hyperactive stress responses that produce abnormally high cortisol levels, which is symptomatic of long-term stress. These abnormal hormone levels can be passed on to offspring during fetal development, who have a greater risk of hyperactive stress response that contributes to anxiety or depression. One of these many children of Vietnamese immigrants is a little poet by the name of Ocean Vuong. So, who is Ocean? Ocean Vuong is a poet born in Ho Chi Minh City, which is formerly known as Saigon. He was born on October 14th, 1988. He immigrated to the U.S. When he was only 2 with his mother and grandmother. Vuong had a complicated relationship with his mother, which is most likely the result of PTSD from living in the wake of the war and moving to an entirely foreign country, as well as not being able to read. He is the author of the semi-autobiographical best-selling novel that we will now delve into, titled "On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous." So, this novel, one second here. This novel is a letter from a son to his mother, knowing that she won't even be able to read it. On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous deals with heavy themes of the subject matters of traumatic effects of war, abusive relationships, race, masculinity, beauty, drugs, sex, coming out, etc. Though saddening at times, Vuong's unique prose style and use of language made On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous a worthwhile read. Little Dog is the main character of the novel, who mirrors the life of Ocean Vuong. He is a young boy who grows up with Rose and his grandmother, Lon, in a tiny Hartford apartment. Rose is perpetually plagued by flashbacks to the traumas she saw and suffered during the war. Her episodes incite perpetual outbursts of rage and violence against her young son. Lon reminds her grandson that his mother cannot help her behavior as she is mentally unwell. Though Little Dog seems to possess a deeper connection with Lon, Lon also suffers from schizophrenia and is never entirely stable either. Though the eventual passing of his grandmother and another attempt to through the eventual passing of his grandmother, and another attempt to writing his mother, Little Dog eventually achieves peace with his loss. Through writing, ascending his memories, the raw truth of his hurt and grief, Little Dog is able to reconcile each of his relationships to better understand himself and imagine his future. Okay. Oftentimes, Ocean would sporadically infer different life happenings of Little Dog, almost like the sporadic nature of the fight or flight response in trauma patients. Little Dog recounts his mother's experiences during the war, as well as those of his grandmother Lon throughout the novel, which result in a stark picture of violence, suffering, and starvation. Rose watched her school collapse after an American napalm raid, and much of her childhood was punctuated by gunshots, frequent bombings, and mortar fire. Little Dog confronts the lasting effects of trauma, including the post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD) Rose lives with after the war. The violence of Rose's childhood in Vietnam mirrored the violence of Little Dog's childhood in Hartford. Here's a quote from Little Dog. I read that parents suffering from PTSD are more likely to hit their children. With the portrayal of war and trauma, or sorry, end quote. With the portrayal of war and trauma in On Earth We Briefly Gorgeous, Vaughn underscores the multi-generational effects of war and ultimately argues that there is a direct relationship between war, trauma, and abuse. When Little Dog is a younger boy, just about 5, he hides behind a door to prank his mother, and as Rose walks by, he jumps out and yells, "Boom!" Rose screams, her face raked and twisted, and breaks down in tears, grabbing her chest and grasping for air. Little Dog means only to scare her as a joke, and he doesn't understand Rose's catastrophic reaction. Rose lived her entire life in the state of constant fear and anticipation of violence, and this state remains even after the war. One 4th of July, when Little Dog's neighbors set off fireworks in a celebration, Rose throws herself on top of Little Dog and covers his mouth. Quote, "Shh, if you scream," she says to Little Dog, "the mortars will know that we are here." It has, or end quote. It has been several years since the war, but the booming sounds of fireworks and Rose's lasting trauma launch her right back into Vietnam of the 70s. After dinner one night, the sound of gunshots ring out, and Rose drops to the floor screaming. "Someone turn off the lights," she yells. According to Little Dog, gunshots are not uncommon in Connecticut and can be often heard from their apartment. Rose's disproportionate reaction to the gunshots is further evidence of her lasting trauma. Here is one of the best quotes that can sum up this all. Quote, "As a girl, you watched from a banana grove your schoolhouse collapse after an American napalm raid. At 5, you never stepped into a classroom again. Our mother, our mother tongue, then, is no mother at all, but an orphan. Our Vietnamese, a time capsule, a mark of where your education ended, ashed. Ma, to speak in your mother tongue is to speak only partially in Vietnamese, but entirely in war." All right. So, out of all the themes of the novel, the nature of beauty seems to be of notable concern. Little Dog is obsessed in how one finds beauty in things, and why we are all attracted to them. Little Dog recalls a memory of his grandmother, Lon, encouraging him to pull out and keep a few violet flowers across a chain link fence that divided the interstate from the sidewalk. Though Little Dog felt sick to do so, he managed to take the flowers and rejoiced in Lon's delight with the flowers. Little Dog then expressed, quote, "It was beauty I learned that we risked ourselves for," end quote. In this way, we can come to learn that an object that is to give joy is also at the expense of risk and danger. Later, following Lon's passing, Little Dog remarks, "I'm thinking of beauty again." Sorry, quote, "I am thinking of beauty again, how some things are hunted because we have deemed them beautiful. If relative to the history of our planet, an individual life is so short, a blink of an eye, as they say, then to be gorgeous, even from the day you are born to the day that you die, is to be gorgeous only briefly. Like right now, how the sun is coming out behind the elms, and I can't tell the difference between a sunset and a sunrise." End quote. For this, or from this, we can decipher that everything in life is not just black and white, but is a balance. Much like how trauma will never entirely outdo the desire for beauty in one's mind and body, even if it sometimes might seem that way. Even if you have a hard life, you are not reduced to the trauma and hardships from your past, and that happiness and sadness exist right alongside of each other. All right, to sum everything up that I've stated today, I beg you to leave with this last thought in your mind. Trauma is not defining, but is a valued contrast to beauty. As bad as the Vietnam War was to the U.S. soldiers who fought in this pointless war, forced to being forced to live among it, like the characters of On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous, is much more undesirable. However, beauty can still be found throughout everyone, no matter how rough their personal past had been.